Hello, my name is Michael Jordan, and I'm the Director of Marketing and Public Relations at Blount Mansion National Historic Landmark in downtown Knoxville, Tennessee. I want to tell you the story of one of my favorite artifacts in the collection here at Blount Mansion. It's this painting of George Washington painted on glass that hangs over the mantel in our great room here at Blount Mansion. This is a totally unexpected story. It involves global trade all the way to China and one of America's earliest intellectual property lawsuits. But first, it's important to understand just what images of George Washington meant to people in the late 18th and early 19th centuries. Simply put, Washington's image was everywhere. In fact, a Russian diplomat who visited the United States observed, "Every American considers it his sacred duty to have a likeness of Washington in his home, just as we have images of God's saints in ours." This is due in large part to the work of Rhode Island-born painter Gilbert Stuart, who painted more than 1,000 portraits of leading figures in early U.S. history. Now, Gilbert Stuart first painted George Washington in 1795, and Martha Washington liked that portrait so much that she commissioned Stuart to paint a second one in 1796 that she would keep for herself. Washington died before Stuart could finish that painting, and the artist kept the unfinished painting for himself, making more than 70 copies over the course of his lifetime. Stuart irreverently referred to those paintings as his $100 bills because that's how much he would sell them for. He was chronically in debt and short of cash and was a stereotypical starving artist. It was the basis of the likeness of George Washington that's been on the front of the U.S. $1 bill since 1929, though for some reason the engraving is backwards on the bill. On March 1st, 1801, Stuart sold one of those $100 paintings to a ship's captain named John E. Swords in Philadelphia. Swords said he was buying the painting for a collector in Virginia, and Stuart made him promise that he would not make any unauthorized copies of the portrait. Well, Swords, who was a smuggler, took the painting on his ship, the Connecticut, on a voyage to China where he had 100 reverse glass copies made. I spoke recently with art historian Dr. Maggie Chow of the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill about the process by which Swords had those copies made.
There's a number of these Washington portraits on glass, and they were all painted in Canton, China, which during the very early 19th century, when this painting was done, was the only port of foreign trade in China. And this was a sort of foreign enclave where they resided, where there were what were called factories, which were specific for trading goods. And then in this foreign quarter where all the foreigners could go, there were a number of artisan shops, including those that made paintings for export. And so this painting would have been made in one of these artist shops that were in the foreign quarter of Canton.
Captain Swords returned to Philadelphia in April of 1802 and immediately began selling his illicit reverse glass copies of Gilbert Stuart's portrait of George Washington. Gilbert Stuart, not surprisingly, had a major problem with this. As I mentioned earlier, he was chronically short of cash and in debt, and another artist named William Heath was selling 500 oil copies of his painting already in Philadelphia. Stuart was not able to stop that sale, but he was determined to put an end to Captain Swords' sale of the reverse glass paintings. He took Captain Swords to court, suing him in the Eastern District Federal Court in Philadelphia, and won an injunction. Captain Swords was ordered to stop selling those reverse glass paintings and seize all of them and give them to the court on penalty of a $2,000 fine. Gilbert Stuart had won this round, and at least for now, those paintings were kept under wraps. The story was largely forgotten until 1928, when a photo of one of those Chinese glass copies of Stuart's portrait was printed on the cover of Antiques magazine. The magazine's editor, Homer Eaton Keyes, was not sure who was responsible for the painting, but within a few weeks, readers from Massachusetts, Pennsylvania, and Rhode Island sent Keyes photographs of their own glass copies of the famous Stuart portraits. And one of the readers informed Keyes of the backstory of the painting's Chinese origins. Blount Mansion acquired its painting from a private collector in Florida in the 1960s. I've seen another identical copy exhibited on the campus of Washington and Lee University in Lexington, Virginia, and there's another one hanging in the Peabody Essex Museum in Salem, Massachusetts. So apparently, in spite of Gilbert Stuart's successful lawsuit, or perhaps after his death, some of Captain Swords' glass copies of Stuart's painting did make it into collectors' hands. The story of these paintings' Chinese origin is fascinating enough in and of itself, but what's even more unbelievable is the incredible amount of skill that the Chinese artists used when they copied Stuart's original painting. They worked on glass, starting with the tip of Washington's nose and working their way backwards. Dr. Chow explains how they did it.
They would hang the original up in front of them, and then they would just translate it onto glass, recognizing all the reversals they have to work into it. What this means about painting on glass is that you're entirely reversing the order in which you might imagine an oil painting would be constructed. So you have to start with what you would think of as on the sort of top of the image, like little glints of light or little details. Those would have had to be painted first, and then you sort of successively work your way from foreground to background. It also is reversed left and right because you're painting on the back of a surface. You're looking at your original, but you're actually making a mirror image copy as well. So it's reversed in multiple ways.
So you see, in many ways, those unnamed Chinese artists who copied Gilbert Stuart's portrait of George Washington backwards onto clear plates of glass were just as talented as the original artist himself. But this is not the only twist in this already incredible story. It seems that the plates of glass the Chinese artists used were not manufactured in China. They were actually made in Europe and imported to China before the artist painted George Washington onto them and sent them to the United States. So in many ways, our portrait of George Washington hanging here in Blount Mansion's main room is a product of an early 19th century globalism that foreshadows the interconnected nature of our own world today. We hope you'll come see it yourself in person when you can. In the meantime, you can take a virtual tour online at www.blountmansion.org.